The DJI Osmo 360, DJI's first 360 camera. Let's find out how good it really is. I bought the DJI Osmo 360 with my own money, and this video contains no paid sponsorships. So if the Osmo 360 has any weaknesses, we're going to find out today. And of course, the best way to do that is by comparing it to the current best 360 camera, the Insta360 X5. To make things a bit more exciting, there are 10 categories that determine the quality of a 360 camera. Each category winner gets 1 point. Let's find out which camera comes out on top. Interestingly, DJI has opted for a more rectangular form factor, while the X5 is elongated. So the Osmo 360 actually looks more like the GoPro Max from the outside. Regardless of the shape, the Osmo 360 is slightly smaller than the X5, and at 183 grams, it also weighs a bit less than the X5, which comes in at 200 grams. On the other hand, I'd say the elongated form factor is a better fit for a 360 camera, since you're usually using it on a selfie stick. Also, the X5's display is not only significantly larger, it's also brighter and of better quality. The Osmo 360's display is oriented horizontally, which is especially useful when you're using the camera in single lens mode. But let's talk about durability, which is one of the most important differentiators between these two cameras. 360 cameras have two protruding lenses. These are potential weak points if the camera drops or if you're using it for action shots. And only on the X5 can you unscrew the lens covers yourself and replace them easily. There's a dedicated lens replacement kit for it. If a lens on the Osmo 360 gets damaged, you'll have to send the camera in for repair. This will cost money and time. How important this is depends on you personally and how you use the camera. But I know from the comments on other action cameras that this is a major factor for a lot of users. Both cameras are waterproof even without a dive case. The X5 up to 15 meters and the Osmo 360 up to 10 meters. But when you use the cameras in water, the Osmo 360's lens can fog up, as shown here. This can also be a significant disadvantage. The underwater shots and the subsequent shots are unusable. You should know that. And I think it's fair to give the point in this category to the X5. Good image quality is the most important factor for me when choosing a camera. That's why this category is worth 2 points. And I tried to take many different comparison shots, not just one or two, so that you can form your own complete opinion. Please take a close look at the following footage. I'll comment as objectively as possible, but feel free to share your opinion in the comments, because it's totally possible that you'll see things differently. The Osmo 360 has a fairly large sensor at 1/1.1 inches, and because it's square, it's supposed to deliver results similar to a 1-inch sensor in a 360 camera. The X5 sensor is smaller at 1/1.28 inches, and also not square. But sensor size isn't everything when it comes to image quality. The X5 comes with 3 advanced image processors. And don't forget, a 360 shot has to properly expose all sides and be stitched in camera. Efficient processing is definitely an advantage here. But all that is just specs. What really matters is how the footage looks. All the clips you've seen so far were shot using the default settings in 8K, which I think is how most people will use these cameras. But we'll get to more settings in a bit. And in my view, both cameras have their pros and cons. As you can see, there are clips where the colors from both cameras look quite similar, like here. But that's not always the case. When there are strong greens, the Osmo 360 tends to shift them more towards yellow. And in the shadows, there's often more red tones. Since it's still midsummer and not fall, the X5's colors look more natural and closer to reality. Another thing that stands out is that the field of view on the Osmo 360 is slightly wider in all these shots. On the X5, I usually export it with the standard field of view Mega, while on the Osmo I either use the default field of view or ultra wide, which reduces distortion a bit. And even though you could naturally increase the field of view on the X5, I think the Osmo 360's lenses have a slightly wider focal length. I usually see that as an advantage. On the flip side, it also leads to stronger distortions, and the distortions are much better controlled on the X5. The default field of view Mega, for example, reduces most distortions while keeping a very wide perspective without pulling the image outward. I wasn't able to get a comparable result on the Osmo 360. If you choose D-Warp on the Osmo 360, the image gets heavily cropped and pulled outward at the sides. However, I do see some advantages for the Osmo 360 in terms of dynamic range. In very difficult lighting conditions, say when the sun is behind the clouds, you can see that the very bright areas in the image are slightly better preserved on the Osmo 360. The X5 shows a bit more blown out highlights in those situations. I think DJI applies a certain amount of HDR processing here, also because the clouds look somewhat unnatural and overly sharp. Here's another cloud comparison. In the X5's shot, the clouds look much softer and more cinematic than on the Osmo 360. And that's actually pretty unusual for DJI. Only the X5 offers a dedicated HDR mode for such tricky situations, which you can activate if needed. However, it's not available in 8K, only in 5.7K. So I rarely use it. But as you can see here, the footage still looks great even in 5.7K with HDR. By the way, on the topic of sharpness and detail, as I mentioned, these shots were taken with the default settings. On both cameras, sharpness can be reduced further. If we zoom in, we can see that both cameras deliver about the same level of detail. While the Osmo 360 protects highlights in 8K slightly better, the X5 usually achieves better exposure. It's not easy to get perfect exposure in a 360 shot, because all sides have to be considered. As you can see here, when you're dealing with direct sunlight on very bright days, the Osmo 360 tends to overexpose, which leads to a loss of contrast compared to the X5. In backlight situations, both cameras handle exposure similarly. This doesn't work so well in the case of D-Lock, and that brings us to an interesting distinguishing feature between these two cameras. Although the X5 also has a lock profile, only the Osmo 360 can shoot in 8K in lock, and only the Osmo 360 has a 10-bit lock profile. This is important in the case of lock, as strong color grading of lock recordings with 10-bit colors usually works much better. So if you often want to color grade your footage heavily, this is definitely an advantage. I converted the footage here using DJI-Studio software, so this is not my personal color grading, but DJI's conversion LUT. The result is not always optimal and a bit too much, but you can adjust the intensity if needed. Lock alone does not always lead to optimal results in terms of exposure, but the footage is intended for editing anyway. On the other hand, the X5 has an interesting feature called Adaptive Tone. Adaptive Tone captures more exposure information during recording, and the exposure is then dynamically adjusted depending on the reframing. This enables high contrast footage with a better dynamic range. And then I noticed this. More than once, it looks as if the shots don't overlap optimally. I think this is along the stitching line. These were the first shots I looked at. At first, I thought my camera was defective and the lenses weren't calibrated properly, but I couldn't see this in the following shots. I took a lot of time to compare the image quality, and if we ignore these last stitching errors, I think the Osmo 360 takes very good shots overall. All in all, however, I wouldn't say that the image quality is better than on the X5, which I think even has slight advantages. But since I find it difficult to determine a winner here, I'm giving both cameras 2 points. The situation is similar in low light. Here too, both cameras perform similarly well, as you can see from these shots. The shots look very similar. In this vlogging shot, however, you can see from my face that the Osmo 360's shot is slightly better and above all sharper and clearer. That's why I prefer the Osmo 360's shot here. On the other hand, when it gets darker, the X5 is better at protecting the highlights, as you can see here in the lights. And when it gets dark, I no longer have the impression that the Osmo 360's recording looks better, as you can see here. And look at the bushes on the right, for example. That really doesn't look good on the Osmo 360. And then there's another problem with the Osmo 360's low light shots. When you move and turn, it looks as if the Osmo 360's lens is smudged. Look at the light on the left here. But that's not the case, the lens was clean. Overall, I see this as more of a tie, so I'm giving both cameras a point this time too. But the Osmo 360 can do something the X5 can't. It is capable of shooting in 8K at up to 50 frames per second. It's not 60 frames per second, only 50, but it's still an improvement. If you want smoother 8K footage or higher resolution slow motion footage of up to 50%, this is an advantage. The X5's maximum in 8K is 30 frames per second. For 60 frames per second, you have to reduce the resolution to 5.7K. In return, the X5 can shoot in 4K at up to 120 frames per second. The Osmo 360 can only shoot at a maximum of 100 frames per second. The quality of the 4K slow motion footage is comparable. But when it comes to slow motion, the Osmo 360 has something special to offer. In single lens mode, it can shoot in 4K at up to 120 frames per second in what is called boost mode. I think the boost mode gives an extremely wide, almost uncropped image of the lens. And it's cool that you can also shoot slow motion in this perspective. Overall, this point goes to the Osmo 360 for me. Both cameras take good shots in single lens mode, apart from the Osmo 360's boost mode with up to 60 frames per second. The Osmo 360 can even do this in 5K. Nevertheless, I wouldn't say that the Osmo 360's 5K shots look better than the X5's 4K shots. In fact, I find that the colors on the X5 look slightly better, even in single lens mode. In addition, the X5's pure video mode is also available in single lens mode, which allows for better shots in low light. The super night mode is not available in single lens mode on the Osmo 360. In single lens mode, the low light shots taken with the Osmo 360 often appear overexposed and don't look good. When we take everything into account, 5K, boost mode and low light, then for me it's a tie. 1 point for both cameras. Let's talk about battery life and overheating. In other words, how long you can shoot with these two cameras. And here too, the answer is not so simple. In 8K 30 and with a high bitrate, the X5 shoots for 1 hour and 31 minutes, while the Osmo 360 shoots for 1 hour and 34 minutes. So only minimally longer, but that's only half the story. Because for the X5, there's also an ultra battery available if needed, which allows you to shoot in 8K 30 for 1 hour and 40 minutes. Which is longer than with the Osmo 360. I also noticed that the Osmo 360 creates multiple files for longer recordings. Not just one long recording like the X5, but several shorter recordings of about 13 minutes each. If you really want to take very long recordings, this is not ideal. And then of course, there is the topic of overheating. And here one thing must be clear. No matter which action camera you use, if there is wind, for example when biking, you will not have any overheating problems with either camera. But if we simply set up both cameras here in the office and shoot in 8K 30, the X5 overheats after 1 hour and 14 minutes at 24 degrees Celsius. The Osmo 360 gives an overheating warning early on, but continues to shoot until the battery runs out, meaning it lasts 20 minutes longer. In real life and under normal use, neither camera will have an overheating problem, but overall, this category therefore goes to the Osmo 360. Both cameras naturally support external Bluetooth microphones. For the Osmo 360 there is the Mic Mini, Mic 2 and perhaps soon the Mic 3. For the X5, there is now also the Mic Air, and the Mic Air has a comparable audio quality to the Mic Mini on the Osmo 360. Here you can hear a comparison between the two internal microphones, but let's also listen to the wind noise. I think you could clearly hear that the X5's internal microphone was able to suppress ambient noise much better, and the X5's wind guard does its job well and can also remove wind noise without suppressing the bass. This point goes to the X5. Accessories are extremely important for a 360 camera. You want to be able to mount your camera in as many different ways as possible and, of course, get the most out of your camera. Insta360 offers a huge number of mounts and accessories. Many of these mounts can also be used with the Osmo 360 without any problems, but some important accessories are only available for the X5. For example, ND filters are only available for the X5. Only the X5 has an invisible dive case for taking 360 shots underwater. You should know that this does not work without a special dive case. Only the X5 has a microphone adapter for connecting all microphones, a quick cut reader, a utility frame, a remote with a preview image, a mini remote, and for example a thermogrip cover. While I can imagine that ND filters will eventually be available for the Osmo 360, I don't think this will be the case for the dive case, as it is very complex to manufacture. For underwater shots, you should go for the X5. For me, this point clearly goes to the X5. And the same applies when it comes to special features. Basically, DJI has simply adopted many of the X5's features, such as the bullet time mode, which is called Vortex on the Osmo 360. There are hardly any innovative new features. The only thing that comes to mind is the boost mode, which we've already discussed. And although not particularly innovative, the Osmo 360 has 105 GB of internal storage. That's definitely an advantage, if like me, you keep forgetting to take an SD card with you. But 105 GB isn't enough for a 360 camera. In addition, the topic of storage is a mixed bag with the Osmo 360. DJI recommends only A2 SD cards from certain manufacturers for the Osmo 360. All the SD cards I have here are only A1, and they work fine with the X5. The X5 also has a number of features that the Osmo 360 does not have. There are more recording modes, such as the Instaframe mode, which simultaneously captures a 360 recording, and the reframed flat clip. With Twist to Shoot, you can start and stop recording simply by turning the camera. There is a cloud service that automatically uploads and stores recordings in the cloud. Currently, I believe 1 TB is free for 1 year. Accessories such as lens guards are automatically recognized, and the GPS data can also be easily imported via the app. No additional accessories are required. This point also goes to the X5 for me. And then there's the topic of software, and that's one of the most important topics when it comes to 360 cameras. You have to reframe every 360 shot, so you can't use the camera without software. There is a desktop studio app and a smartphone app for both cameras. In my opinion, DJI Studio app is perfectly fine. It It has keyframes, automatic tracking, everything I personally need. What it doesn't have, unlike the Insta360 app, is a complete video editing tool, and only the Insta360 Studio app allows you to export in ProRes and thus in the highest possible quality. But for me, the bigger difference is in the smartphone app. The Insta360 app not only offers keyframes and a tracking feature like the DJI Memo app, you can also easily select the perspective in the Insta360 app, for example selfie, and the entire clip is reframed with a tap so that you are in the center of the shot. Reframing couldn't be easier, and it's the feature I actually use the most. There are also a variety of predefined camera movements, and with Shot Lab and Flash Cut, a variety of special effects. None of this is available in the DJI Memo app, so the X5 also wins on the software front. And with that, the X5 wins with 9 to 6 points and remains the clearly better overall package for me. But the Osmo 360 is also a good camera and is absolutely successful for a first attempt. But how much do the two cameras cost? In the US, both cameras cost the same at $550, although I believe the Osmo 360 is not yet available there. Here in Europe, the Osmo 360 is cheaper, whereby Insta360 frequently has special offers. I will provide links to both cameras in the video description. And no matter which country you are in, if you use the link for the X5, you will receive a double lens replacement kit worth $45 as a free gift. But the offer is limited, and I don't know how long it will be valid. So what would I recommend? If you frequently work with DJI cameras and are familiar with the D-Log workflow, then I think the Osmo 360 is a good additional tool. However, if heavy color grading isn't that important to you, I think the X5 is the better choice overall. In particular, the interchangeable lenses, better software, accessories, and good, flawless image quality simply offer a better overall package. So what do you think? Am I wrong or have I overlooked something? If so, let me know in the comments. And if you want to learn more about the X5, check out my detailed tutorial on it. A beginner's tutorial on the Osmo 360 will follow soon. So stay tuned and see you next time.